When it comes to relationships, people often find themselves saying, if only I knew then what I know now. Joy Egerich, Director of Love and Respect Now, wants to bridge the gap between generations and help her peers think about relationships now as opposed to 20 years into marriage. In the Illumination Project, Joy has a candid conversation with her father, Dr. Emerson Egerich, about faith, life, and relationships. She is asking hard questions that so many of us want to know from those who have already gone ahead. Today, I'm joined by a panel of guests, Bridget and Tree. You are single, not to put you on
put
blast
it out there, yeah.
on television. Melissa McEachran, you are single as well.
And I am single. I think we should say an oath or something. I don't know.
Should we have name tags?
Something like that. We're in it together.
Available.
Bridget, so,
Hello.
Yeah. We'll give you their Twitter handles later. Alyssa and Josh Berg, you guys are newly married, 5 months.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Are you regretting it yet?
No, not at all.
It's good so far.
At this point, we figure 5 months in, we're pretty much experts when it comes to
Exactly.
marriage.
This is why
So
we're on the panel, right?
Perfect. That's why we have you here.
Yeah.
Well, you know, one of the things that Joy and her father talk about is, if only I knew then what I know now. Is there anything in your marriage in the 5 months that you kind of look back and you're saying, I wish I knew that?
Well, for me personally, I think a lot of people get caught up in the fairy tale. And for me, I do have my Prince Charming, and he is everything that I would want in a man. I have to say that, but no.
You're on TV.
Yeah. No, but I think a lot of us expect the perfect thing, and it's not always perfect. And just knowing that you can't prevent the fights, you can't do anything extra, you just have to be yourself in that relationship and kind of go into the relationship knowing that, instead of just kind of being clouded by the perfect fairy tale, is that it is imperfect, and through that God can really shine. And it's through those imperfections that he shows us grace, and he shows us love, and he shows us who we are in him and who we are with each other. So
Wow.
yeah.
Well, Josh, she kind of laid it all out there. What about you? What do you think? Is there anything that you really wish that you knew before you got married?
I think in terms of, it's really important just to kind of lay down, your own selfish ambitions. I think when you enter marriage, I think you think that your old life, it's going to be the same, and it's really not. It's so much better, but it's definitely, becoming one. You really have to lay, a lot of different things down, but it's good.
Yeah. Well, Joy talks a lot about having a mentor before you get married. Melissa and Bridget, you guys aren't married. I'm not married. I'm dating. I didn't let everyone know. I'm dating. But so do you have a mentor in your life who kind of pours into you about relationships and advice?
I have several, actually. So I have a couple of really amazing women, some in their 30s, some in their 40s, who really, those are the women that I generally go to and kind of talk to about it. And I mean, there's my mother as well, but, she's been out of the game for several decades. So, generally, and also she doesn't necessarily always understand the dynamic and just the technology that's involved that kind of, changes the dynamic of the dating world. But I have two women that I do go to kind of just bounce ideas off of and just.
Well, and you say the technology that's involved. I mean, now people are dating online dating.
Yeah.
And a couple years ago, that was kind of looked at like, no, don't do online dating. But now it's totally accepted, right?
Yeah. Yes. Melissa, I'm going to let you jump in with that one.
I think it is accepted. I think it's just life is different now, right, than even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And so where people meet are different, and where people socially gather is different. And I love the question, Tanner, about what would you say, right, if you could go back. And I think as someone who's not married, but I could look back and say to my 20-year-old self, who might have not thought that at my age that I would be single, or, right, we have an idea of what our life will look like, and this isn't what I thought. It doesn't mean that it's wrong or right, but it just isn't what I thought. But if I could look back, I'd say to myself, it's going to be okay. I'd say in your 20s, figure out who you are, figure out what things that do you value, what things do you want your life to be built around. And for me, my 20s were huge in establishing that, which I think only helped then in that next process to say, you know, however old you are, and if you're single or you're married, but be sure of who you are and be confident in that. And that's what that foundation is, right, for a good relationship. So sometimes I think when you talk about mentorship, so a lot of what I get to do is I have a mentor in my life, but I get to mentor our interns here at Crossroads. And so a lot of what I look at these 21-year-olds, 22, I'm like, don't sweat it.
Right.
Sometimes it feels like I'm 21, I don't know what I'm gonna do with the rest of my life, I don't know who I'm gonna marry, all these things. And you know, give it some time, figure out who you are, be confident in your relationship with Christ and who He's made you to be, and that kind of stuff, take you the distance.
Right. Can I just like pack you in my pocket and take you with me, and you can just pour all of this wisdom into me? Because I feel like, you know, we're talking about mentors, and one of the things that I, you know, question or wonder about is what's the difference between having a Christian mentor and a non-Christian mentor? I mean, is it important to have both sides? What do you think?
Okay, I'll pipe in here just because I do have, that's one of my mentors, like the two mentors that I mentioned before. One of them is Christian, one of them is not. And I think for me, I don't think it's a good idea to be so insular, right? Like I think as people, we tend to kind of like dwell in our bubbles. And so, you know, people who look like us and think like us and talk like us and all that stuff. And obviously there's value in that in terms of, you know, believers and having like-minded people around you. But I also think it's important to have different perspectives. And also I am very grounded in my faith. I know who I am in Christ, right? So, and that's with anything. So whether you're Christian or not, if I'm coming to you for feedback and you're giving me stuff that I'm like, I don't know about this, you know what I mean? I don't know if that's biblical. I'm intelligent enough to parse through what you're saying to me and take the good from what you're saying and from the bad, whether you're Christian or not. So I think absolutely, if you're a person of faith, you really cannot, you know, the Bible talks about wise counsel, right? And you really, there's a reason that often you'll find alcoholics hang out with other alcoholics, right? There's like a like-mindedness that needs to be there. So if you're a person of faith, you need to have a mentor who is a person of faith and strong in their faith. But I also don't think there's anything wrong with bouncing ideas off of someone who isn't in your bubble per se.
Sure,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And I think you have to be pretty, like you, Bridget, you're pretty secure,
Yeah.
right? And you know the difference between a right or wrong wisdom that you might get, right?
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know for the two of you who are recently married, if you had those experiences where you had marriage counseling or people that gave you that type of mentorship and advice.
I think that that's really important, and as Joyce said, to have that accountability and to have that openness in your relationship and not hide it. Josh actually came over for Thanksgiving, and he'd only been dating me for a week, and in front of my entire family, he said that he was thankful for his future family-in-law.
Wow.
So that kind of put it
That's
out there
very bold,
pretty soon.
Josh.
Kind of bold.
Well, that kind of segues into marriage. I mean, we're talking about dating and relationships, and then ultimately, obviously, you know, you want that to turn into marriage. And Joy and her father have so much wisdom to impart on a younger generation. So let's take a look at this clip and talk about fear in marriage when we get back.
All right, so apparently our generation has been surveyed, and about 95% of us say that we desire to get married. And yet I hear from people all the time who are saying that they're fearful of it. They're scared, whether it's because they've had a broken relationship or they saw their parents get divorced or they just don't know, they don't understand each other. And so I feel like that's contributing, those misunderstandings are contributing to a delay in marriage, cohabitation, or if people are getting married, they're not staying in it. You know, I've told my mom, I'm like, your generation gets divorced after like 30 years, my generation gets divorced after 3. And so I just want to ask you, you were a Bible teacher for so many years, you know, why would we get married? And why does Scripture talk about marriage as being something important?
Well, that desire that's there is planted by God. As we've pointed out, unless you have the gift of celibacy, a special grace given, God intends that individual to be married. 1 Corinthians 7 is very clear on that. There's an appeal made to consider singleness because of the opportunities that presents, but Paul says if you marry, in 1 Corinthians 7:28, you've not sinned, but you will have trouble. And I always tell people to make sure they understand that verse. There is an element of trouble, but the desire for marriage is planted there by God. So then the question is, okay, I desire that, but yet in this culture and with what I've experienced, I have a fear that if I get into a relationship and it doesn't work out, I'm going to be devastated. And so there is this kind of sense of a fear of commitment, and the fear that I'm going to get hurt, or we've seen what's happened with our mom and dad. And so there is really a shyness here, a pulling back, and yet the desire is very deep and very pervasive.
Yeah.
You hear Dr. Emerson talking about God planting this desire in all of us to get married. And oftentimes I think that people have fears of marriage. Do you guys have any fears of marriage or commitment?
No. No. I think my thing is just like, I just want to make sure that I am cognizant and fully understand what it is that I'm entering into, and the same thing with my partner. But I'm from Ghana. Like, we are, like I always tell people, what we do very well is we get married, we have babies, and we die very well. You know what I mean? Like, that's just the type of thing that we do. Like, marriage is an integral part of sort of a person's life. And sometimes I think almost to a fault, pushing people before their time. But I think, and it's interesting because, I have the Ghanaian cultural background, and then I also have the Canadian cultural background, where you have one side of the culture that's just like, why would I get married? And then there's another side of the cultural background that's like, oh, you're not married by the time you're 24, you're practically an old maid, just give up.
Right.
You know what
I'm
I mean?
from the South.
Yeah.
And so I am an old maid. I should have like 4 or 5 babies by now, and I'm not even married.
Yeah. So for me, there's no commitment there. I know that is a good thing. I know that it's something that God wants for us, and that it's a good thing because God ordained it. But at the same time, I think there definitely needs to be a conversation. Conversations need to be had about why people are doing it, right? Like, and whether or not at the moment that you're doing it, whether it's the right decision for you and things like that. And I think there also needs to be like a conversation about the fact that God gave us a life, and there's a fullness in life, whether you get married or not. Like, your life, I'm sure you guys can attest to this. Your life didn't start the day after you guys got married. You guys had full lives prior to that. And I think it's really important to sort of walk in that and to remember that and to think about that.
Were you guys fearful that you were going to lose that individuality when you got married?
I don't think so. I think my biggest fear going into marriage, obviously he had no fear at all proposing after 9 weeks, was that I wasn't good enough. And so I think a lot of girls tell themselves that their past determines their future. And I was afraid in that. I was afraid that the person that I was in the past didn't deserve the best that God had for me. And when you encourage other people and when you talk to them, what you are now isn't who you are in the past, I think that lets go of a lot of fear. But a lot of people do hold on to that, is that, God does want his very best for us, but it's hard to accept that sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of my fears, I guess, and maybe you guys can agree with this, is fear of marrying the wrong person. Yeah. God brings people. Alyssa, you were talking that you were dating someone before you and Josh started dating, and obviously when you get older, everyone you start dating, there's this potential for marriage. So do you have a fear, Melissa, of meeting the wrong man who's not it?
I don't think I have that fear like Bridget, which seems kind of crazy. I think that I'm able to make good decisions and all of that. And I also really believe that once you make that commitment, it's a commitment. It doesn't mean, as you said, that who you are when the day you get married isn't who you're going to be 25 years later either. People grow, people develop, people change, experiences change us. And so you make that commitment, that's what it is. And then you work through, as Emerson said, it doesn't mean that the day you get married, all your problems go away, right? If anything, I from the relationships I've been in, I always say when you're in a relationship, it's like a giant mirror in front of your face. And all I see is, oh, I messed up there and I screwed up, right? So so when you've been married for that many years, I think, again, you change, you develop, you grow. And so I'm not afraid of that commitment. I think, though, there's a lot of people who are, the stats would say that people are older when they're getting married, less people are marrying, less people are committing. And I think that is a little bit of our generation of saying they're afraid of that. They just want what is great right now. It's like, do I really want to make that commitment for the rest of my life? It's good right now, but do I really want to make that, and how long term is it? So I think that's part of the society we live in. We live in a fast-paced, make the decision, what feels good right now, but we don't think about the long term. But to me, it's, I think it's a commitment more than it is this the perfect person? Do they match everything on my list? I'm a full person, right? Who's looking for someone else to spend the rest of my life with, and that means the highs and the lows, right? Whatever happens. So
definitely. Well, I think one of the questions, Melissa, you and I have talked a lot about is, where do you meet good quality Christian, godly men these days? Does anyone know the answer to this?
Okay. Bridget, do you know the answer to this?
I don't have the answer. I mean, you know, I'm not married. I don't have the answer. But like, I mean, for me, one of the things that one of my mentors always says to me is like, use the technology. And I know this is not going to be popular with a lot of people, but you know, I think there's like online dating is a tool for people. And mind you, I am not preaching the gospel of online dating. Honestly, I'm not. I'm just saying use the tools and the technology that are available to you, right? And I think there's a bit of a fear and a stigma with online dating, but also, like I said, like, we have, you know, God-given word, and we have wise counsel around us, and God gave us brains. Like you can, whether you meet somebody sort of like in person or you meet them online, you have a brain and you have teaching and you have wisdom behind you to make appropriate decisions. And so I'm a big proponent of like, hey, use the technology that is available to you. You know, another one of my mentors always says, it's just an introduction service. You get to meet people that you'd otherwise wouldn't meet in your circle. So that's one of the ways that I get to meet great godly men. Yeah.
How did the two of you meet?
We met through mutual friends, actually. So we had, you know, we had gone to similar churches here and there, and
I think church is definitely
huge.
A place for people to connect, especially in their faith.
Yeah,
so I think that that's definitely a resource to all of us. Go to your church. Maybe you can meet a man. And
But no church hopping. We don't
exactly.
don't go just to date. Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and kind of share some wisdom with me, because you know I'm still dating and hoping to get married one day. So thank you.